Human advancement can be measured in technological progress. Since the start of the digital economy, we've been creating the right conditions for innovation to thrive and deliver positive change. By creating policy, regulatory and legal frameworks that keep things stable, predictable, fair and scalable. And these pathways we create drive economic growth and build better societies. Behind the breakthroughs and ahead of the curve, Access Partnership is playing a critical role in a critical space at a critical time.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome all our viewers and listeners to the Space Insurance in a Changing Space Environment webinar. And I would like to invite everyone to submit questions during the panel through the comment section or our chat. I'm Ria Urban. I'm a freelance space journalist and have been for a while. And I'm just relaunching my Rocket Ria YouTube and podcast channel. So follow me on social media for updates on that. But today is not about me. We're going to discuss the evolving landscape of space insurance instead. And this event aims to explore critical topics and emerging trends in the space industry, focusing on the perspectives of space operators and insurers. And because space insurance is an indispensable component of the space industry, safeguarding investments and managing risks associated with space missions, we are going to address the dynamic challenges and opportunities within the space insurance sector as it adapts to the evolving space environment. The objectives for today are to disseminate valuable insights and knowledge about space insurance, as well as to showcase a recent in-depth report that analyzes trends, challenges, and opportunities within the space insurance sector. And we will also foster discussion on the potential impacts of the UK Space Agency's third-party liability models changes on the global space industry, and facilitate knowledge sharing and networking among industry experts, government representatives, and stakeholders. And by the end of this webinar, we're hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the evolving landscape of space insurance. We will be informed about the recent report and its findings that aids decision-making processes, grasp the potential impacts of the UKSA's consultation on the space industry, and establish connections with key stakeholders in the space insurance sector. And I'm not going to be alone doing this today. We have 4 panelists. We have Steve Plant, the Orbital Liabilities Lead of the UK Space Agency. He is developing the secondary legislation and policy on liabilities and insurance to support the Space Industry Act 2018. Steve has over 20 years policy experience in the UK civil service, with previous roles covering animal health issues, development of cultural programs, and carbon trading policy. Hi, Steve. Our second panelist is Neil Stevens, Head of Space at Price Forbes. He is a trained lawyer and commercial contracts expert. He is a space law specialist and has extensive experience in space insurance. Neil has advised governments as well as national and international space agencies. Welcome, Neil. Our third panelist is Dominic Rora, the Senior Insurance Underwriter for Space-Related Products and Industries at AXA XL. His responsibilities include negotiating and managing insurance contracts with worldwide customers, and his specialties include contract negotiation and insurance portfolio management. Hi, Dominic. And last but not least, we have Hamza Hamid. He's a Senior Policy Manager for Satellite and Telecommunications at Access Partnership in Singapore. He's a Pakistani lawyer currently serving as the chair of the Space Generation Advisory Council. And before joining Access Partnership, Hamza worked as a legal consultant at the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law in Rome. He led the effort towards establishing an international system of secure transactions law for the space sector, while also advising governments on issues related to spacecraft financing, blockchain law, and crypto law. Hi, Hamza. I'm so glad you're all here. Have I left anything out from the introductions, or are you happy?
Happy.
Okay.
All good, thank you.
Let's get cracking. So my first question is to Dominic, if that's all right. So given the evolving space landscape, what were the standout trends and developments in 2023 from the perspective of insuring space assets?
So thanks for inviting me, first of all. For 2023, I would say it's a mixed bag because on the one hand, the business is booming. I mean, the number of launches is increasing more and more each year. The number of satellites launched is always increasing. We're seeing new launches like the maiden flight of the H3 and the Starship, which were earlier this year. We have a Vulcan in December. We have Ariane 6 next year. We're seeing many startups as well, like the Epsilon or smaller launches like the RFA or Maya Space in Europe, Rocket Lab in New Zealand. We have new generations of technologies with software-defined satellites, new types of missions, going to the moon, going to asteroid mining, permanent space stations, that kind of things. Now, when I look at it from my own window as an insurer, the big issue that has been on everyone's mind since the middle of the year is profitability. It's no secret that there's been a number of major losses this year, and many people are reviewing their plans. We have reviewed them at AXA XL, and we have decided to continue our commitment to this line of business going forward. And the challenge is now to work with brokers and with our clients to find a way that's sustainable for everybody.
That's right. Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything? I forgot to say that, the questions I directed to someone all the time, but everyone else is free to chip in. Right, just following on from this, Neil, I would like to ask you, from a liability insurance perspective, how have events in 2023, such as increase in space launches as well as increase in space debris, influenced the risk landscape, I can't speak English, for space operations?
Well, so just looking at back across 2023, and this number keeps changing almost by the day. We've had 87 Falcon 9 launches, and now it's launched 284 times. So there's a massive increase in the cadence. Falcon 9's been the most successful. These are stats from Wikipedia, so you might need to sense check them. But 99.3 success rate. And in terms of the numbers of launches, I mean, we going back to maybe 2010, 2014, that sort of period, we used to see far fewer launches. So with the likes of the Ariane 5, Proton and Sea Launch were the main launch vehicles launching to GEO. Now the focus is really on low Earth orbit. So we've had a number of transporter missions, which take small satellites up to low Earth orbit, multiple payloads. And I think in terms of the trend, certainly, if you look at the ESA debris report, is for an increase in the amount of debris. So more debris, I think greater congestion around the 550 kilometer altitude level. But certainly in terms of losses, and I would say this not in terms of liability, because there's been relatively few over time, but the losses have come from GEO, and they've all come from post-loss or post-separation events. In terms of what I describe as the new space arena, and that's one of the areas that we really focus on, there's been a couple of insurers have certainly declined to underwrite new space, and that's largely for reasons of congestion in the low Earth orbit area. I'm not sure whether that's something that will be sustained, but it makes issues like maneuverability much more important. There's much more of a focus on that now from the insurers that are engaging with the new space community. So I'd say those are really the factors that are driving a change in sort of the liability environment as far as space insurance is concerned.
Right, thank you. And I have a general question to anyone and everyone here. How do you see the European regulatory environment evolving for insuring space assets, and what impact might this have on insurance strategies? Good question.
I'll take that one actually. Then nobody else is going to. So I think in terms of European regulation, I think there's much more harmonization now. We're seeing space agencies actually collectively working together, and I think we've got a great UK space agency. Steve's worked very hard on the things he's been doing, but I think my perception is that there's a lot more collaboration rather than sort of competitive. Everybody still wants to see business move to their country, but I think there's more collaboration now than we've ever seen.
Thank you. And before I go to
sorry,
sorry.
Just to comment on that. Sorry to interrupt. Just to talk about perhaps the UK perspective on things.
Okay.
Just for a minute, I think obviously, as Neil has said, one of the key elements is around collaboration, and there is a lot of collaboration across the different jurisdictions, and particularly now where missions are involving more than one jurisdiction. So, for example, one of the key things that's being looked at the moment, and one of the key services under development from a technological and delivery perspective, is around active debris removal, for example, where over the course of time, what we will be seeing is that there will be to remove satellites. There will be jurisdictional issues relating to those sorts of operations, and so one of the things that we've been working on from the UK perspective is given within such operations, they are highly complex from a technical perspective, but when you then include other jurisdictions, that complexity increases. So how can you manage that complexity in a way which is both fair and equitable, but also reduce the burdens as much as possible? So one of the things that we've been looking at, for example, is working with New Zealand on a joint arrangement in terms of setting out the principles for how such missions would be managed from a practical point of view. Because obviously we've got the context of international law, in particular on looking at the liabilities that arise through such missions, potentially third party. How can you share those liabilities in a fair and equitable way when you may be removing objects, for example, that were launched 50, 60 years ago, and there had been no intention of removing those or interacting with those objects in any way, shape, or form, and then take into account both the legal and regulatory frameworks for the jurisdictions involved in that particular mission. So I think one of the things that we are seeing is that where you have these greater interactions between different space objects from different jurisdictions, that from the innovation perspective, then we also need to follow that up with other regulatory alternatives than might otherwise been put in place previously. So again, that's one example of areas where there is this increased collaboration between different jurisdictions.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I could just quickly chime in here. I think what was mentioned is so important, particularly from a legal and regulatory perspective. I think when you speak of space insurance, you really have to ask yourself the thinking that a lot of states deploy behind why states put minimum requirements, particularly for third-party liability insurance, on space operators and satellite operators. And then all of that, like Steve said, comes from international law. It's a combination of the Outer Space Treaty and the Liability Convention, both of which then create these obligations for states to authorize and continuously supervise the activities of space companies from within their jurisdictions. And under these treaties, states can be held liable for an unlimited amount should there be damage caused by one spacecraft to another spacecraft or something of the sort. And that's where these insurance requirements stem from. And then at the same time, outer space law has this concept which says once a launching state, always a launching state. And so when you see all of these innovations come through where multiple jurisdictions are working on projects together, where in the future, satellites start to change ownership in space objects start being deployed on celestial bodies that might trade ownership. Collaboration and cooperation is so important. And then the establishment of the types of regulations and schemes that like Neil and Steve were talking about that showcase states working together, having joint programs that offer certainty to the status of these spacecraft. So I think, the regulatory developments even in Europe point to this direction and are really, really promising to see. And then I think should continue in this direction to continue to promote innovation.
Right, thank you. Hamza, I will stay with you because my next question is to you. So we see collaboration, obviously international collaboration, but we also see collaboration between government policies and the insurance sector, right? So what role do these policies play in spurring innovation?
Yeah, I think, just building on from what I already said, having worked a lot with governments in my past life and now a lot with the private sector in my work at Access Partnership, that collaboration and cooperation between governments and the private sector in shaping policy really does play an important role in stimulating innovation and being an enabler for innovation. So I think government policies are what put together the environment in which things such as space insurance, but policy in general operates. And I think government policies can stimulate innovation in the space sector by setting ambitious goals and standards. So for instance, policies that encourage or mandate sustainability practices, such as debris mitigation, push companies to develop new technologies and methodologies to pursue these activities. I think similarly, policies that facilitate new forms of space activities like on-orbit servicing, lunar exploration, also open up new markets for innovation. I think there's also a lot of role government policies play in spurring and encouraging innovation through promoting programs for startups and smaller companies that are often at the forefront of innovation, but sometimes lack the financial resilience that larger companies have. At the same time, I think from a government perspective, it's always very important to balance regulation with flexibility. And it's only where you strike that balance correctly that you continue to encourage innovation. But at the same time, you cannot under-regulate because then the risk that you're sort of promoting within the industry is greater. And I think finally, and then, this we already talked about, international collaboration and standard setting from a government perspective can always, encourage growth within different markets to happen together, and then thereby, resulting in the creation of businesses that work across borders and then contribute to growth. I think the space sector is inherently global, and international collaboration policymaking is essential. And that can come through industry initiatives and in talking to the industry, where governments collect advice and learn where the industry is moving towards, and then put together regulation that complements the growth of the industry rather than restricting it. And then I think from an insurance perspective, which is, what we're talking about in this webinar, regulations and requirements for space insurance need to be mindful of the nature of the space industry at any given point in time. We see jurisdictions where still the minimum requirement for third-party liability was set where the space industry was all GEO. And those geostationary satellite third-party liability requirements might work for operators that are big and produce one satellite every 3 or 4 years, but just don't work or are not feasible for small satellite operators that might be thinking of launching multiple satellites every year. So I think regulation evolves and industry feeds into that. So I think that collaboration and cooperation there is super important.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I sort of reinforce what Hamza said there? I think there are a couple of key things there. I think one of the things is flexibility, and certainly looking from the UK perspective, one of the things that we've tried to really do in terms of our regulatory framework is to keep it outcome focused. So rather than prescribing how the way that operators do things, it's actually these are the sort of things you need to consider, and then demonstrate to the regulator how you're mitigating the risks down to as low as reasonably practicable from the UK perspective. And so in that way, using the framework we've got, the legislation and the guidance, etc., and of course set it within the context of the international legal framework as well, is that we've been able to apply those frameworks to situations and mission types where we haven't got extensive guidance in place, for example. So, for example, looking at the licensing of large constellations, in-orbit demonstration missions for active debris removal and things like that. So I think the UK very much views regulation as a key enabler of activity, because otherwise, from the UK perspective, such activity will be prohibited. And so keeping it at that level, which leads to the outcome focus, then gives us that flexibility to adapt over time. But I think also another thing that Hamza pointed out as well is keeping that under review. And that's one of the things that the UK is doing at the moment. So we've got the Space Industry Act 2018 that's been in place now for 5 years. But we're now at a review point for that. So we're engaging extensively with the space sector to say, okay, we've started to use that piece of framework, that groundbreaking legislation to support launch activity from the UK and satellite operations and things like that. Does that still deliver what you as a sector need? How does it need to adapt to keep up with the pace of developments? So by actively reaching out to the sector and engaging and saying, what do you need to help support what you intend, what you want to do on both the legislation, but also other things as well, in terms of financing and things like that, plus the insurance market and things like that. Gives that and taking that real holistic approach, really, I think, sort of provides that end-to-end capability, etc., that the sector is really looking for. So that's certainly something we're looking to do from the UK perspective.
I would add one thing on that, is that as an insurer, the way we see ourselves in that respect is to provide our expertise to the regulators all across Europe, just to provide our own input, just like manufacturers and operators need to provide their own inputs. And at the end of the day, we need to find a solution together that is workable for everybody, where each player, each stakeholder can take his own responsibilities and keep the risk, manage the risk, transfer the risk across the board in a consistent and in a consistent manner, in a way that is efficient and a way that is sort of common across all jurisdictions, I would say.
Right. Thank you.
And so just to come on that as well, I think one of the interesting, we do a lot of work with UNUSA, for example, and the work they do is invaluable in terms of providing technical assistance and things like that to new spacefaring nations. So the UK has funded a number of different projects in that particular area. And one of the things that UNUSA does really advocate is putting in place these legal frameworks to provide the clarity to operators, etc. And so we've certainly been engaged in a number of conversations with a number of jurisdictions to help them into that process of either introducing new regulatory frameworks along with other spacefaring nations as well. So again, that sense of collaboration comes into this as well. But then also for those who are looking to update as well, and one of the key topics that's always discussed is actually liability and insurance. And so I think it's certainly an area that's gaining a lot of traction and interest. Obviously, how that then ultimately translates into regulation, etc., is to be seen. But I think it's certainly an area now where a larger number of nations are really looking at this very seriously now, as the number of operators increases within jurisdictions. And so I think, to underline what Dominic said there, I think that discussion between all the parties is really important to understand that there is that support needed, etc. So we've certainly done a lot of doing a lot of engagement with insurers around particular policy areas, for example. So I think that's really key moving forwards as well.
Thank you. Steve, I want to stay with you, if that's all right. So just to talk about the consultation for a bit. So the UK Space Agency launched a consultation on modifying its third-party liability model. Could you give us the background of this consultation and tell us what will happen after it closes on the 7th of December? What are the global implications of this?
Yes, thanks, Ria. So in terms of the consultation, it's quite a broad-ranging consultation, actually. So it's looking at a number of different specific proposals, the primary one of which is to move from the largely fixed approach to setting liability limits for satellite operations, moving towards a variable limit of liability. So the UK government has already said that that is what it intends to do. So this consultation looks at a methodology for how it intends to do that. And the key element that's really being focused on as part of this is sustainability, which is probably one of the, if not the key topic of conversation at the moment within the sector. And so what we're looking at is developing a methodology that currently looks at two stages. So firstly, and more work will be needed on this as well if it's agreed to take this methodology forward, is to develop a baseline insurance amount. So it would be one of £50 million, £20 million or zero, which would look at what we're terming the sort of the sustainability risk of emission. So we look at the generic risk of the activity being undertaken and developing a methodology for assessing the risk of a particular orbit in which that activity will take place. That would then develop a risk matrix score, which would set a baseline. And then the second stage, which we're also consulting on as well, would then be to look at the mission and ask a number of sustainability related questions with respect to that mission. So we'll look at a number of key areas that the UK government is looking at this stage to prioritise with regards to sustainability. So looking at the manoeuvrability of satellites, what is the post-mission disposal timeline, what are additional measures that are being been adopted for trackability of the satellites, how much engagement is there with operators, with those operating in the same orbits, for example. And so that assessment would then ultimately lead to one of those three limits of liability being applied in the in an operator license. So that focus on sustainability is really sort of the key driver behind that. And increasingly, the UK government is looking at other potential levers as well that can be used to incentivise the uptake of more sustainable practices as well. So one of the things we're looking at in the consultation is views around reducing operator licence application fees to reflect that sustainability focus as well. So that's sort of primary sort of focus of what we're looking at. But also the consultation looks at other issues around longer term space sustainability as well. So questions as fundamental as looking at how we define what sustainability is, because there are it's such a broad subject, and we could probably spend 2 or 3 webinars of this length discussing that on its own. So you obviously have things around definitions in the long-term sustainability guidelines, for example, but there are other definitions elsewhere. So from that basis, then some of these key questions around sustainability, we can then look to build a longer-term framework. And then look to use things like the insurance and liability framework as a means to incentivize the adoption of these different practices. So one of the key things about the framework we're looking to adopt is that it is flexible. It can respond to future policy considerations as we go along. So it's not intended to be set in stone, but over a period of time, it can then, as domestic and global thinking on sustainability develops, it can then be used to incentivize how operators then look to uptake new thoughts, etc., on sustainability and things like that.
Thank you. Right. I will now turn to Neil, if that's okay. So how does the involvement of government, as exemplified by the UKSA's recent consultation, affect liability insurers, and what considerations should be made in response?
Well, I think the activities of the UK Space Agency are exemplary, and I welcome the approach they've taken. It's been just to sort of expand upon some of the things Stephen said. It's been a very inclusive consultation period with industry, and it's thrown up a number of innovative solutions as well. Things like what's termed the mutual model. There's been broad engagement. That's what I've certainly witnessed. The impact for, I think, liability insurers is probably negligible, really, in terms of things that have been done. So just to sort of go back to sort of talking about that mutual model, the mutual model is essentially, it's very much like something which is used in shipping. So you have, in shipping, you have ship owners that have their own, they pay into a mutual fund, and that fund is used then to settle liability claims. Fortunately, there's been very few liability claims, but the idea would be to expand upon that and adapt something like that. In terms of how that would affect insurers, I think it would have negligible impacts, and certainly there's very definitely a need for commercial insurance. But I think there's also a need for engagement in new areas. So thinking in terms of cislunar activities, things that we haven't really encountered at the moment. We're very lucky that the space insurance community that I work with are very adept to taking on new risk profiles and looking at different things. So I think we'll see an expansion certainly in terms of cislunar activities, and I'm not so sure that we need sort of necessarily extra regulation, but I think if I had to pick one thing that I'd like to see happen in terms of regulation, that would be sort of across multiple jurisdictions, would be the introduction of salvage rights. We use those on the surface of the earth in terms of there's a treaty known as the Treaty of the Laws of the Sea, and what that says is that if you've got a ship that's maybe stranded on rocks, then somebody could come along and rescue it and obtain rights over that vessel. So you'd either sell it back to the owner or they pay you for the removal. So that I think would be a great sort of initiative to take forward and use towards the debris issues that we're all trying to engage with, to move forward and actually sort of then you actually make debris valuable, and people would go and salvage it, and then ultimately repurpose it, retask it, or have it used and reused in space. So I think there's that would certainly serve, I think, the interests of the community in general. But it's, I think moving to anything that involves an extension of or a new treaty, I think is going to be a stretch at the moment. So maybe it's something that could be sort of added on. But I mean, the Laws of the Sea, that's a treaty that's been very widely adopted. So I don't know why we can't just sort of borrow some of those principles and maybe attach that to one of the existing conventions or treaties.
Thank you.
Can I just to sort of add on to Neil's points there, Ria, if I may? I think one of the things that Neil's mentioned there is the mutual model. That's one of the alternative approaches that we're looking at for provision of third-party liability insurance. And I think one of the things that we're looking to do is to look at things holistically. So rather than looking purely at the change of approach to liability limits, is also looking at looking at these alternative potential models for provision of third-party liability insurance, plus also other initiatives as well that are being developed, thinking in particular around the space sustainability standard, for example, and about the interrelationships between those different elements. So very much taking that sort of holistic approach to thinking about these things in combination, and what the overall benefit for that is with regards to the provision of insurance, both in terms of potential cost, but also the availability of insurance as well. And also the consultation we're looking at looks at suggestions for exactly the sort of thing that Neil's looking at, given the different concepts that are being discussed within the sector at the moment around, for example, creation of a circular economy in space. How can you stimulate demand for active debris removal services? There are a lot of questions in the consultation around how can we do that? Could we, for example, is it feasible, for example, to set targets for the removal of debris over particular sizes, for example, to stimulate the demand. How can such services then be funded in the longer term as well, through financial instruments or other mechanisms as well? So yeah, very much would welcome suggestions from people listening to this session about how we can address some of these really quite fundamental questions around longer term sustainability as well. So this is a real opportunity for those who wish to really engage and help shape UK government policy on this area for over the coming decades, really. So so have a look at the UK Space Agency website. Please do follow the links through to the consultation there, and we'd very much welcome all suggestions on this front.
Thank you.
Ria, I think, I found it really interesting listening to about Steve and Neil. I would just wonder, I think one of the challenges that industry and particularly new space often encounters when going out to market to, find space insurance for whatever innovative thing they want to put up into space is that risk profiling often can be quite challenging, which leads to premiums being high, and then the cost of getting an insurance policy sometimes, be a big burden. And I think the types of ideas proposed in the UK consultation, particularly with varied insurance levels and risk-based assessments, certainly is a step in the right direction. And I think, but I wonder if the sustainability standard that's being developed and the sustainability standard that sort of drives the assessment towards what that third-party liability requirement should be would then also be a driver to bring down insurance premiums. I'm not sure, and perhaps Dominique and Neil can answer that better.
Sure. I think in terms of if you're just talking about the mutual model, then there's definitely efficiencies to be created from that, but it would still require commercial insurance. But one of the other sort of, I think, great benefits of that is that if you're talking about a club of operators, you're going to be inclined to let in people that have got good practices, and that goes hand in hand with the whole sustainability idea. It's if you're a good actor, then you can come and join this club, and if you join the club, you'll benefit from sort of hopefully a better insurance experience, shall we say.
Yeah, for my part, I would say that insurers always look on a case-by-case basis at the risk profile. So obviously this year has been very challenging, and it has been the proof that the premium levels in the recent years were not adequate. So there's an effort to be made there, but all things being equal otherwise, we are in a process always to review the risk profile for each individual request and each individual client, and adapt the product that we sell at the pricing level to the risk profile that the client wants to transfer to us. So at the end of the day, it's a balance between what the regulators request in terms of insurance coverage or risk mitigations, and what the client wants to transfer to insurance, and what we can offer. It's always tailor-made.
Can we stay with you, Dominique?
Sure.
So we talked about the space insurance market not being profitable in the past 5 years. So can you talk about pricing and amount of claims maybe, and give us an idea how the insurance business can get back to profitability?
Sure. So, it's been in the press that 2023 has been a very difficult year for insurers in the space line of business. Just to give a few ballpark figures, we're looking at more than $900 million in claims for 2023, with premiums anywhere between 550 and 600 millions. So clearly not enough premium to pay for the claims. and let alone the operating expenses and the return on equity that our shareholders would expect. If I take a longer term view, since 2019, globally, the market has lost money. Say for every dollar in premium that we have received, we've paid $1.20 in claims. And even more than that, some players have said that they have lost money every single year since 2019. So the obvious conclusion of that is it's not sustainable and something needs to be done. So each and every participant in this market can take a different view. Some companies, some of our competitors have decided to withdraw or to reduce their exposures. At AXA, we've taken the different approach where we intend to remain a top tier player, and so that means continuing the relationship and the level of support that we enjoy with our clients, but we need adjustments in the way we do business with our clients, and the easy answer would be to drive rates up, and that's certainly an element of the answer. But it's not the only one. So the other elements would be to discuss with our clients what is their risk retention and if they are ready to accept more risk or to retain more risk in order to keep their premium their premium at a reasonable level, or perhaps review the way they do risk prevention, like preventing the risk of debris and risk of collisions, type of stuff. So all in all, we need to go back to profitability, and that's something that we need to do as a collaboration with brokers and with clients.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add something to this?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a distinction between the space insurance market and the liability market. They are two very separate markets. So a liability market is purely looking after liabilities. And Dominic's talking about the market for insuring assets, which is a different class.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
And so just to add on to that as well, again, one of the other things that our consultation is also looking at as well is to pick up one of the themes that our former Minister Freeman was talking about in engaging with the insurance sector, is around looking at other opportunities that may exist within the space insurance market as well, ensuring other forms of activity as well. So again, that's one of the other things that we're looking at as well. So from the UK government's perspective, our primary focus is on the third-party liability market, given our legal, international and domestic legal obligations. But certainly one of the things we also want to encourage as well is sustainable environment in the orbital sense, but also sustainability from companies' perspective as well, making sure that their businesses can thrive and flourish. So, how can insurance play a role in helping to facilitate that as well? So I think, again, really trying to take that holistic approach to say, how can companies keep themselves on a sustainable footing, and again, the role that insurance can play within that.
I think I'd add to that in terms of, I think we're seeing a lot more, not just distinction between insuring assets and liability, and as Stephen mentioned there, that insurance can certainly be used as an enabler, a commercial enabler, to help people grow their businesses. It just takes a little bit of innovation, and AXA XL are very good at that, and finding ways to actually increase commercial capabilities as well. So coming up with new ideas and new products.
Thank you very much. I don't think I'm going to ask any more questions, because I heard that there were some questions coming in from the audience, if that's okay. Okay, the first question is, given the need for greater jurisdictional cooperation, what are the main obstacles to that happening? And that's from John. So the main obstacles.
Well, I think it's just international cooperation at the moment. The geopolitical scene at the moment is quite fractious. So I think it's perhaps not the best time for cooperation. But I think just to, as I mentioned, that idea of salvage rights, that's something which many states have already signed up to in terms of the laws of the sea. So I don't know whether it's sort of an easy win, but I mean, I think there's certainly sort of mileage in that, and that would be, I think, sort of something that would bring on more commercial activity for people to clear up space if you make debris valuable.
Thank you.
I think the one thing that I think that's completely correct, but the one thing that I would certainly add to that is that one challenge when it comes to setting harmonized rules for things such as third-party liability requirements for satellites certainly is the level of development within a country's space economy, right? So the most developed space economies have a different set of industry stakeholders to set requirements for, whereas emerging space economies sometimes have a different set of operators that they need to keep in mind to then set standards and regulations for. And when you think of uniform standards, I think those are harder to put together for an industry that's so different in different parts of the world. I think what's more important is collaborative programs and joint initiatives where governments, put together schemes where operators can participate in as a group, and that allows them to then have access to better markets, and then also feed into each other's systems. And then I think there's a lot of ways that can be encouraged, and I think we've talked about some of those in this call. But I think it's important to recognize that different parts of the world are in different stages of development of their space economies, and that will always impact the rules and regulations that are being put together dealing with different operators.
Thank you.
Yeah, just some thoughts myself. I think obviously when it comes to international cooperation, there are different levels of international cooperation. So obviously we have the UN COPIO structure to discuss things with all spacefaring nations, etc. So there's a regular cadence of meetings and updates and progress on those fronts. And obviously then you have things like bilateral or slightly multilateral arrangements. So for example, in the context of ESA, for example. So there is a lot of international collaboration that happens naturally, and as mentioned, we have the overarching legal framework. But again, we can work within that context on a bilateral basis. And one of the things, for example, that we're looking to do with that template is that it's something that could then potentially be picked up by other countries as well, and used and adapted to their own particular domestic legal frameworks. But again, there's also other elements as well that can also be looked to fill some of these gaps as well. So we've got things like guidance rather than laws. We also have commercial contracts, for example, where you can work across jurisdictions, etc., take into account legal differences between systems. So I think there are a number of ways to sort of make progress on some of these issues, which can then again be disseminated out over time. So I think there are methods in which to do this, and again other initiatives as well, linking back to the Space Sustainability Standard, which I think is getting a lot of interest internationally as well, where you can then develop some common frameworks by other means as well. So I think there are different ways in which you can have those common goals achieved, and I think the main thing is, and this is one thing that we working with the people who are developing the Space Sustainability Standard, is making sure that UK government policy and the aims of the standard are also aligned in the same direction, because what you can't have is national frameworks giving one set of rules and then other commercial frameworks and initiatives going in another direction. So I think this is where, as we discussed earlier on, that engagement between the sector and all parties is actually really important to make sure that we're all aligned and moving in the same direction.
Of course, thank you. Do we have more questions? I'm sure we do. Okay, David wants to know, space cybersecurity insurance, why is this not required? Why is this so unpopular? Interesting question.
Okay, so I'll go for that for a moment. And Neil, you're welcome to pitch in. I'm sure you have comments on that. I would say it's at this point in time, cybersecurity insurance, generally speaking, is a developing market. I mean, even on the ground, if we're talking about cyber risk in factories or property insurance, anything like that. So this is a new type of insurance that is being developed. For space, I would say that there's been some demand, but not that much. So since there wasn't that much demand, there hasn't been that much. There hasn't been any offer yet, as far as I know, simply because the question was not there. Now, I guess eventually it is something that's going to become a real request from our clients, and it will become a product.
Thank you. Neil, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, cyber risks are expressly excluded in launching and orbit policies. I think there is scope certainly for some sort of right back of cover, but then it needs to be priced. And I think the insurers are much more focused on the technology that they're working with, rather than looking at sort of I suppose the outputs, if you like, and sort of how those are managed in terms of working with how the compute what's actually being done with the satellite or spacecraft. So I think it'll come in time, but at the moment it's expressly excluded, and if it was to be included, it would need to be priced separately, certainly.
Absolutely, and I would add that I've discussed cyber risk with a number of clients, and so far it is sort of out there and a theoretical concern, but most clients are telling me that their major concern is the satellite actually working, and the risk of having a cyber attack against their satellite is perceived as being fairly remote at this point in time.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that the other part of that question was, why is it not required, right? So I think under international law, it doesn't say what type of insurance is required. So if you read the Outer Space Treaty and the Liability Convention, it talks about two types of insurance. One is, or two stages. One is pre-launch, one is post-launch. I think then it sort of becomes the responsibility of governments to then develop their own regulations and rules, and that's where requirements for things such as third-party liability or launch or particular types of operations of a spacecraft come in, and so whether or not should it be required is a question that governments will, I'm sure, eventually need to address. But I think Dominique is quite correct in pointing out the amount of risk cybersecurity at the moment poses to space operations. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now we have a question. I think it's Ruth. So are the various green ratings useful / informative to the insurers?
I think we've not quite got to that stage yet where we're actually actively using those. There's Stephen, I think it's correct to say that it's still not been implemented, but the idea is that it would be. I think certainly if you've got, if what we're talking about is the red to like amber green situation, then if you're talking about in the green situation, potentially you'd have no liability insurance or no liability insurance required if you're down at the lowest of those levels. So I think that we're still waiting for that to come. I don't think it would be a slam dunk, and if there was an insurance requirement at the lower level, that you could just say, right, you've got a green rating, so it will impact the pricing. There's a number of different factors that are involved. It's just another indicator of where you are on on that scale. So it wouldn't prevent insurers, in my opinion, from still taking a close look and assessing the risk. That's their job.
I completely agree with that. It's it will become eventually an input to our analysis, but right now it's a bit early to do that. The best we can do is really look at the general attitude of our clients towards space sustainability and deorbiting the spacecraft when they're at the end of life, and taking all appropriate measures that they can think of to limit the risk of debris. But it's more a sort of informal parameter that we take into account rather than a hard one.
I think I'd just add to that as well, in terms of if you've got good sustainability practices, that tends to point to sort of like a company that would be perceived as being careful, and that's what insurers want, is operators that are careful and manage their risks thoroughly, and so that would influence, but it's not going to be the only measure.
And I think it might be interesting also to see how different policy drivers also have that sort of feedback into the insurance premiums, etc. So, for example, two of the areas that we're considering in the UK at the moment is whether it would be a mandatory requirement for all UK licensed satellites to have propulsion, and also to look at reducing the current 25-year guideline for deorbiting down to a lower number of years. So depending on obviously that's still an ongoing conversation, but obviously depending on the outcome of that, it'd be interesting to see how that then may translate into the insurance premiums, etc. Of course, it also loops back into the variable liability limit approach that we're looking at as well in terms of those assessments, and then it'd be interesting to see how that then translates through into the insurance as well. So that's something I think would be interesting to see moving forward.
Thank you. We have one last question. We have more, but time for only one more. So Nicholas is asking, given that most UK satellites to LEO are licensed under, let's say, 1986, how does the current UK consultation feed into those decisions, especially regarding sustainability?
I'm happy to take that one, Ria. So the approach that we're looking at would apply to licenses under either of the acts under which UK licenses can be issued. So whether that's the Outer Space Act or the Space Industry Act with regards to satellite operations. We're looking at under anything that will be UK licensed.
Thank you.
I think to that, just quickly, that in terms of having some sort of retrospective effect, I'm not a fan of that. If you're licensed, you've already obtained your license, but I think certainly, it may be the case that the slight requirements have changed and that something new is required, but retrospectively, that's I think you've already committed to your activities once you've launched under the 86 Act.
Absolutely, yes. I think what we'd be looking to do is apply all of these new policies, etc., to things that are beyond a certain date. So things, for example, around propulsion, etc. Obviously, you can't apply those retrospectively. So so I think from the equity point of view, then we'd be looking to apply these new approaches, including the insurance requirement and the methodology, to applications received after a particular date.
Thank you very much. And now we don't have time for more questions. I'm very sorry about this, but we have to go to the closing remarks. So Hamza, is there a message that you want to leave us with after this panel?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's clear that as the space industry continues to evolve and change, the way we think of insurance, both in terms of requirements and the market for space insurance, will evolve and develop to cater to the needs of these emerging space technologies and new space more generally. And I think it's really nice to see governments moving in that direction. So I think the UK consultation and some of the provisions that are being talked about are really forthcoming and then inspire confidence for the industry. But at the same time, efforts towards collaboration, cooperation only need to increase in order to ensure that more entrants can move into the market and that actors within the space sectors from all parts of the world can easily get access to insurance and continue to grow their business. So I think space insurance is certainly an evolving and an emerging field, and I think there's a lot more to come.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else would like to add something?
I'd just add to that. I think we're lucky to work in this the space insurance market. It's full of bright minds and bright people, and we're certainly no strangers to innovation.
That's great. Dominic?
Yeah, and I was just going to say that insurance has been an enabler for innovation and for economic growth for the last 500 years or so. It's been demonstrated that the maritime business commerce has been enabled by insurance. And clearly, insurance is there and will be there to enable the development of the space economy.
Thank you. And Steve, would you like to add anything?
Well, firstly, thank you very much yourself, Ria, for facilitating this session. It's been hugely interesting, and also to fellow panelists here as well, and also to Access Partnership for putting on this session. I think there's never a boring time to be involved in space, but at the moment there's so many hugely exciting things to get involved with, and I think looking at sustainability, looking at what stakeholders are doing, I think this partnership approach moving forward is going to be absolutely key, and insurance is going to be absolutely vital in helping to support industry to help industries thrive, to help space be managed, etc. So I think lots of potential opportunities in the offing, challenges as well, but I think working together we can overcome those and provide a really vibrant space sector to help benefit humankind and the planet as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for today's panel and for sharing your expertise as well. And I would just like to encourage everyone to like and subscribe to Access Partnership for more webinars like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.